Let's put on the gear for the thumbnail. This would be a good time to start the intro. What's up guys, my name is Frankie, this is The Money Resolution, and today we're talking Vespas and how mine has saved me thousands of dollars in the last 3 years. Let's begin. There's a wrong noise. Vespa means wasp in Italian. Vespa manufacturer Piaggio also makes an obscure three-wheeled ride called the Ape, which means bee. You guys, there are lots of videos and articles out there on Vespas, a huge cult following definitely online, and I went down the rabbit hole this week researching all there is to know about Vespas. Today we are gonna have some fun talking about Vespas. I'm ultimately gonna reveal why I bought a Vespa. Now, I'm not a huge mechanic, car, motorcycle guy, so I'm not gonna get into all the nitty-gritty details and specs. But I am a finance numbers guy, so I'm gonna ultimately reveal exactly what this has cost me to own for 3 years and what I have saved in comparison to owning a car during the same time. I'm gonna get into all the pros and cons that you should definitely be aware of and some specific things like what is it like to get your license? Do you even need a motorcycle license? All the rules and a lot more. Insurance costs, the most common questions I get, and ultimately help you decide if a Vespa could be a great replacement for your car. And stick around until the end of the video because I'm gonna reveal a few cheaper alternatives that you can actually ride around town without a motorcycle license. And again, I'm coming at this from the angle of, is a Vespa a great financial alternative to owning a car? That's because my name is Frankie and this is The Money Resolution, where we resolve to get good with money. Like this video if you appreciate this video and all the content inside of this. Consider subscribing to the channel. I put out videos roughly once a week on all things personal finance. And drop a comment down below. I'd love to know which model you either currently have or what model scooter, Vespa, motorcycle, etc., two-wheeler that you're considering getting. So first of all, why would a frugal money nerd recommend buying a Vespa? In fact, there are some savings to be had that I'm gonna detail in this video. And recently I put out my second book called Money You Can Hack It. And tip number 39 or hack number 39 in this book is very near and dear to my heart. And it is simply go two-wheeling. So I tell the story of the Vespa in there. And I'm gonna start by telling you quickly the story of me getting a Vespa. About 3 years ago, pretty much to the day, I moved into this apartment complex. And shortly after, about 2 weeks after I moved in, I discovered my car that had been parked outside on the street had been vandalized. After meeting with the police and filing reports and meeting with insurance, they decided this was actually a total loss, especially due to the damage specifically on the roof. So what I thought was a car worth about $5,000 ended up being, just a couple of weeks later, a check from Geico to me for just over $7,000. So they definitely rounded up on the value according to Kelley Blue Book. Now I had this brand new, pretty large deck and nothing to put on it. So I used roughly $2,500 to furnish that deck. I didn't really know what I was doing with money at the time. And I used the rest to research a down payment for a car replacement. Started with new cars, went to used cars, and then I started thinking about Vespas. So I went scouring Craigslist and I landed on this 2014 GTS 300 Super Sport. I especially liked the matte black. Now when I got there, what I realized is this bike listed at $500 had actually been dropped one time, meaning it had hit the ground on its side. This is something you always want to avoid at all costs with a motorcycle because it can really ding the value. So the scratches were pretty minimal and just on one side of one panel, but I did definitely use that in negotiation. I ended up landing on about $4,600, paying in all cash again with that check from Geico. And I have to say, driving it home that first time, hitting 50 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, that was one of the most exciting rides I'd ever had on any bike because I had never been on a motorcycle or anything that had gone that fast. Financially, I have to say this has been one of the biggest wins or hacks of my life in the last 3 years. I went into this video thinking I probably save on average about $2,000 a year, and just a little bit here I'm gonna reveal exactly what that savings is after some calculations, and I think you're gonna be surprised. I was, to the point where I technically lied in this book because I hadn't run the numbers. Okay, let's start by talking cost right off the bat here. So a brand new Vespa is gonna run you anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000 or $9,000. However, if you go used, you're gonna find some great used ones from 5 to 10 years old for $3,000 to $5,000. $5,000, right in that range. And things you definitely want to look for are low mileage, good tires, a smooth test ride, definitely test ride, no rust, ask if it was stored inside, for example, and definitely try to future-proof it. If you're thinking you're gonna wanna go fast sometime in the future, don't settle on a 50cc or maybe even a 150cc. That's why I ended up going towards that 300. If you don't know what the CC stuff is, just the higher, the faster. Just think like Mario Kart. In fact, I think there's Vespas in Mario Kart. Just know that over 50 cc's, you are going to have to get your motorcycle license. Another thing to look for when buying a Vespa is that it comes with 2 keys. One of them is gonna be, I don't know, brown or whatever color. The other one is sort of like the master key, and it's blue in most cases, maybe all cases. That's the key you really need because there is technology built into these. So if you wanna make other keys like this one for spares, you gotta have that main master key. So something to look out for. So let's talk about other upfront costs beyond that $4,600. I'd say I spent another $400. One thing you're absolutely gonna need is a helmet, and it must be approved by Department of Transportation. It has to have this sticker on the back, the 12th man sticker, optional. And these are gonna run you, anywhere from $75, $100, up to $200. So be prepared for that. You're also probably gonna want some gear. So some things you're gonna wanna consider are it's legally required to have eye protection. So I bought this little bubble thing that goes on this. Keep in mind though, any sunglasses will work, but of course at night that doesn't work so well. You might also want some gloves. I think that's kind of a non-negotiable, especially in colder months. I honestly just went out and bought these super cheap like handyman gloves, so nothing official, maybe 15 or 20 bucks. Definitely get one of these total covered face masks, again, for the colder months. I actually have a lighter version and then like a thicker winter version here. And then of course you might want some rain gear. I keep this little poncho stored in there for emergencies, but otherwise I have a waterproof rain jacket and pants. The last thing I bought, actually they threw it in, was a cover. If you're gonna be storing it outside, I absolutely do recommend you keep it covered to prevent rust and keep it in tip-top shape. Now, one thing I didn't get was the vintage Vespa jacket that I really wanted. I still haven't got it. My birthday's coming up, hint, hint. Okay, so I wanna outline some further costs. After 3 years of owning this, outside of that initial startup cost of roughly $5,000, what has it cost me to have this Vespa year in and year out since? Maintenance-wise, I've had 1 oil change on it. I've also had 1, what we'll call, incident. So unfortunately, I took the bike to a Seahawks tailgate. We actually won the game, but I came back to my bike to find it again on its side. So the second time, the good news was it was the same side as where those original scratches were. The bad news was they quoted me roughly $1,000 in damages. What I decided to do though was not make a claim, did the minimum, just repaired a few different things, and it ended up being about $400 in damages. I have to assume that was a Cardinals fan because they lost in not cool Arizona. Although, it'd be very cool to have one of these in Arizona. So gas and miles per gallon, let's talk about that next. Mine holds, I think, just over 2 gallons a tank. When I fill up, which is roughly 1 time a month, I usually spend about $6. So annually, gas comes out to just about $75 a year. Tires, 60 to 100 bucks each, and you only need, of course, 2 of them. I have not had to replace mine, so again, that's something you want to look at when you're buying. Motorcycle insurance, this is where it gets a little bit annoying. For me in particular, that's because I have to have both car and moto insurance just in case I want to drive someone else's and be covered. Also, it can be a little bit expensive because, as you can imagine, there's higher risk for insurance companies. So all in here, I have the numbers. I pay $105 a year for car insurance. It's much less since I don't have any cars registered in my name. I pay $245 a year for motorcycle insurance. In the state of Washington, I think this is different elsewhere, registration for a motorcycle is actually more expensive in some cases than cars. So I paid last year roughly $205. I think in previous years it was less, so we'll just round that off and call it $200. All in 3 years, outside of my initial cost of $5,000, I've spent $225 on gas, $400 for this one incident, which is actually when I got my oil change, and that's included there, $735 for insurance, and I'm excluding car insurance in this case because that's sort of optional, $600 for registration. This all comes out to $1,960, $653 a year, $54 a month, and if we want to go down to the day, it's $1.81 a day. Let's run those numbers again and include that initial 5K because that's a pretty chunk of change we can't ignore. Total cost of ownership is $6,960. That's $2,320 a year, $193 a month, $6.44 a day. $2,320 may not sound super inexpensive when it comes to transportation, but let's go ahead and compare that in terms of transportation for the average American and what it costs to just own a car. According to thesimpledollar.com, the average American spent $9,004 on transportation last year. This includes the cost of the cars, cost of fuel, cost of car maintenance, and things like airplane trips. So other transportation is included in this as well. However, if we're focusing just on car ownership, NerdWallet reported for vehicles driven 15,000 miles a year, average car ownership costs were $8,469. So if you're doing the math, and I have it in front of me, it's $6,150 a year that I save. And I actually had to double take when I figured this out. I ran the numbers today and I couldn't believe that that's actually what we're talking. So in theory, that's something like $18,000. There's some miscellaneous cost, and I am actually still contributing to my girlfriend's car that I do use occasionally, but still, that is a huge chunk of change that I'm saving annually using the Vespa. Not to mention, it's better for the environment. Not to mention, it's a ton of fun to drive. So I think the conclusion is, it's time for me to buy a second Vespa. I'm totally kidding. I definitely intend to have this for, I would say, about 10 years. But does it hold its value? As I mentioned, thinking about selling it maybe after 10 years. I would say yes personally, but in doing some research online, some people disagreed. They went back and forth. But I'm gonna say after 10 years, I'm probably gonna be able to sell this bike for about half of what I paid for it. Some of the vintage ones that I found online are still going for thousands and thousands of dollars. So I think it's a great investment and definitely holds its value. I made a few really smart decisions when I bought this. When it comes to your value and what you might save a year, your mileage will vary. See what I did there? Stupid. First off, I highly recommend, just like with cars, you do not buy new. I think the sweet spot is something like 5 years old, maybe give or take a year, and always pay for it in cash. If you don't have the cash, save up, then pay for it in full with cash. Second, negotiate. Do not be scared to negotiate and find out where you have some leverage. Obviously, this bike had a fall, so I leveraged that immediately. I also asked when I was checking out the bike in person if they had a lot of interest. Hearing no, I knew that I could also use that for leverage. And finally, with making my offer, I was gonna be offering to pay in full up front in cash, which is really appealing for them. So I could use that as leverage as well. And I didn't make an offer on the spot. So I took a day or two to really think about it. And when I made an offer, I said, this is a final offer, take it or leave it. Finally, the last smart thing I did after buying this bike was, since my car was recently vandalized and totaled just sitting out on the street in a neighborhood that's usually relatively safe, I went to my property manager and I asked if I could park this bike for free indoors in the garage. He agreed, no questions asked. And I actually even picked out a spot right under the security camera to make sure that if anything happened, we'd have it on tape. These can be kind of easy to steal, I've heard out there, and this is one reason insurance can be a little bit higher as well. Okay, I'm gonna go through this list relatively fast. Next up, I'm gonna talk pros and cons of owning a Vespa. These are sort of the things you need to know before you buy. I mentioned it earlier, but yes, you can ride on highways if you have your motorcycle license and the bike is fast enough to keep up with traffic. And you can also ride in carpool lanes even if it's just you. Second, parking is a breeze. Some people say online that you can park on the sidewalk. I've never tried that. I think it's a state by state thing, but that's one way to score a sweet spot and maybe save on parking. And again, I park in my building for free, no problem. Sometimes you just gotta ask. Speaking of, each state is gonna be a little bit different, so check with your local DMV or DOL or whatever it's called in your state to see some rules that are maybe a little bit different across states. For example, in Washington State, you don't have to wear closed-toed shoes, which I thought was pretty interesting, but you do have to wear a helmet. And if you're in a state that does not require a helmet, please, please, please always wear a helmet. Safety is number one when riding any bike or motorcycle or scooter. Speaking of, you can have a passenger on the bike. They also must wear a helmet that is DOT approved. And the bike, at least in my state, has to be designed to hold a second person, whatever that means. I think personally they're super easy to ride and really easy to get comfortable on, especially when you compare it to something like a motorcycle. So it's got a really nice low center of gravity. I would compare it to something like maybe learning to ride a jet ski. Also, I find it, especially here with COVID, particularly nice to take to the grocery store. Again, I get a good spot usually up front. And secret little hack here is it prevents me from buying too many things when I'm in the grocery store because I have limited storage. I've got that basket on the back that really helps. There's a hook in the front, and I'm typically wearing a backpack as well. Plus there's storage in the seat itself, so you'd really be surprised at the amount of stuff that I've been able to carry home in one trip. Oh, another little fun pro that I didn't know was a thing, but it kept happening, so I looked it up, is that other motorcyclists will wave at you. It's not like in the air as they drive by, but it's with their left hand and sort of at like a 45-degree angle down below. Some of them are too cool and they don't wave at scooters, but I often find when I wave at others, they'll wave back. And it's a little insider thing with motorcyclists. It's kind of like us versus them, and a reminder to be super safe, them being cars. Another fun little perk here is that you can drive a moped or a Vespa through a fast food restaurant drive-through window. You might get some funny looks, but you can do it. Just don't order drinks. There's not really anywhere to store that. Although I think they sell an accessory for cup holders. Okay, cons, let's start there. There's no cup holders. You know, that's a thing. Also, you're definitely exposed to the weather, so both cold and bad weather is gonna impact you. One thing to keep in mind on the road is when it rains, the center of the lane can be a little bit more slick because of oil. With the heat though, it's like you wanna layer up for safety and cover your exposed limbs, but then you get extra hot, but at least you do have a little bit of fresh air, like fake natural AC. Your vision is definitely impaired in the rain. One thing I actually recommend if you're using something like this is to just put a little bit of Rain-X on it. It's less safe. Safety is a key thing here. You're obviously quieter than a motorcycle, so just assume nobody else on the road can see or hear you. Be hyper alert at all times. The next con is that you still have to pay for things like parking and registration, which I covered earlier. Sometimes when you approach a traffic light, it's not gonna flip because you're too light to register it. So I did look it up, and in my state, I think after like 2 or 3 minutes, you can just run the light as long as nobody's around, or just have your passenger hop off and go hit that walk button. Also, another con is helmet hair. There's no reverse button. Also, as I mentioned earlier, you do have to get a license for this if it's over 50cc. What that looked like for me was actually about 6 or 7 hours of some training and some book learning. Then we went out and took a driving test and a written test. It was pretty hard to fail that thing. I think they make it kind of easy on you, but it is gonna cost you another $175 or $200 on top of those initial costs. A tip though I'll give you is get comfortable on your bike and do your test with that bike. And then finally, I would just say in general, it's really hard to navigate because you don't have a GPS in front of you. You might be able to get like a little attachment or something like that for your phone, but several times I have definitely had to pull over and look up directions. Little pro there is I've learned directions better in my city. It's sort of like before we had spell check, we used to be good at spelling. Those are the costs, that's the breakdown, that's the savings, those are the pros and cons. So who is a Vespa or a scooter specifically for? Well, I would say anyone environmentally aware, this is definitely a great eco-friendly option. Anybody, like I said, looking to save some money when it comes to what I call the big three: housing, food, and transportation. Also, anyone who owns some vintage Vespa gear but doesn't have a Vespa. That's a really specific audience, but maybe someone that's intrigued by motorcycles but wants sort of a nice, easy way in to learn, or anyone that lives in a city with nice, smooth roads. And yeah, I'm looking at you, Seattle. We need to get it together and fill a lot of those potholes. They really are definitely a con I didn't mention earlier. If you do have access to a car that's not yours, a Vespa might be a great option for just you. College students might be a great idea, although I guess you can't really drive it through campus and we're in COVID, but I could see how a little 50cc could be the only thing you need for college, especially on the weekend when you want to go grab a bite to eat or something like that. Okay, before we wrap up here, let me know down in the comments below if you have any questions. Also, I mentioned a few 50cc alternatives I was going to give you at the end of the video that are a little bit cheaper. The first one is the one I had, which is the Honda Metropolitan. I think I paid something like $800 or $900 for mine used. The second is the Honda Ruckus, and this one's really, really popular because you can do some awesome mods with this thing. You should know though that Vespa does make bikes at 50cc, so that might be an option for you if you know that you never need to go beyond something like 35 miles an hour. For two-wheeling, obviously you could consider something like an electric scooter. Be safe on those things. I went on one once and just instantly felt a little bit scared, I'll be honest. Also, of course, the best eco-friendly thing you can do is just rely on the two wheels of a bicycle. If you have just a bicycle and you walk everywhere, again, you could save up to $9,000, actually more than that, because that was the average a year. Anyways, that's it, guys. I just wanted to give you this super cool transportation hack and reveal some of the numbers about the savings. I mean, this is thousands of dollars that I honestly didn't even realize I was saving. So this was a lot of fun to put together. Hopefully you got some value out of the pros, the cons, and everything you need to know in terms of buying your first Vespa or moped or scooter or maybe motorcycle. But I do want to be super clear about one thing. I am not saying go out there and buy a brand new Vespa in addition to the brand new car you already have. This is a video hopefully encouraging you to consider your finances when it comes to transportation. There might be lots of other ways you can bring down your transportation costs. This is just a creative one I was really excited to share. So yeah, sometimes it's not always the most convenient and it's a little bit dangerous, but that's what makes life exciting. Well, that and joining a motorcycle gang or a Vespa gang. I wonder if there are Vespa gangs. Finally, I have one burning question I really need to ask you, which is, what should I name my Vespa? If I'm being honest, I never named him or her. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any great ideas for names for my Vespa. Once again, guys, my name is Frankie. Like this video if you like this video. Consider subscribing to The Money Resolution. I put out videos roughly once a week. Stay safe out there, save some money on transportation, and I will see you guys on the next one. I'm already doing this wrong. This on first. Glasses on. This is like Super Troopers corny. Ghost ride the whip. Ghost ride the whip. I know, I'm scary. Another con. See you guys.